make sure it's recording because last time I did this and it wasn't. So that was a good time. Great. Here we go. Well, my name is Adam Dorito, and welcome back to the Tuxes and Tomahawks podcast. I am really excited to bring on Captain Chris Kuehne, and he is a Marine Corps veteran, and he's facing a significant challenge in his life right now. And I definitely wanted to bring him on the show. We met at Trump Bedminster in New Jersey a few weeks ago. And as someone who supports the Trump campaign and everything going on in the political background, it is definitely my mission to talk about the history of great Americans and what they've done for this country and the injustices that we've been seeing over the past several years with lawfare and everything else going on in the political realm here in the United States. And Chris had a firsthand seat to it. And we'll talk about how, interestingly enough, we were kind of connected in that space when I got sent out to that area right afterwards. So Chris, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you for having me, Adam. It's a pleasure and an honor to get to speak with you.
So Chris, your background's fascinating, and I want to talk about that first. So talk to me about where did you come from? You know, how did you meet your wife? And tell me about your entire time with the United States Marine Corps in the early 2000s.
Well, I come from a military family. My dad spent 33 years in the United States Army. I'm not really sure what he did. I think he was in intelligence. He was like the CO of Fort Huachuca and a bunch of crazy stuff over there. So a little bit of a disconnect, but I moved out when I was 16. I've been on my own since I was 16. So pretty unique. I held 3 full-time jobs, went to school, and really struggled to kind of make ends meet. When I turned 18, that kind of set me up for that work ethic that I have today. Really work hard, put in the grind and just do good things. So when I was 18, went into the military, enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, and went to boot camp in the early 90s. Really interesting career. Enlisted wise, I speak Hua pretty good. Been to some pretty good Army schools and Marines. I was a Marine Corps Scout Sniper. That's the vast preponderance of what I did when I was enlisted to a certain degree. Then I spent my time. I went up to Staff Sergeant. Spent some time at Parris Island training recruits, not as a drill instructor, as a PMI. Just to clarify that. And then I commissioned as second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps in December of 2002. Again, technically, I was supposed to be an artillery officer. Went to OBC in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, good old Lawton. But I never did any artillery because of my previous infantry background. I spent most of my time in Iraq training, living day-to-day, grinding with Iraqi soldiers. I was a platoon commander in combat in 2004 during Phantom Fury, River Blitz, River Sweep, those things. But the vast preponderance of my time in Iraq was working with Iraqi soldiers, developing riverine operations with them in conjunction with the Navy SEALs, the 7th Division MIT. So that's primarily what I did.
And that must have been a fascinating experience for you because you went in there right after 9/11. You knew you were what you were getting yourself into, and obviously rules of engagement were very different back then. So tell me about your time in Iraq, like especially compared to what our soldiers are dealing with now overseas. I mean, it's a much different environment, and you were at the forefront of the invasion and being on that support team.
Yeah, it's uniquely different. The rules of engagement were definitely different. I guess eventually. I was there during the most kinetic times, 2004 and 2006 were really the most kinetic times in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And I just caveat, I never deployed to Afghanistan because I was injured in 06, but definitely different. The rules of engagement were definitely different. We were out there hunting terrorists and trying to make the world a better place,
Yeah.
But what they're facing now with the current administration, their hands are tied behind their back. The military service has become a weaker shadow of itself in comparison, in my opinion, today than it was back when I was in the military. And that's all branches. I had pretty much dealings with all branches.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely something I saw. And actually, one of my friends in my hometown, Lance Corporal Brian Perrello, he got killed on January 1st, 2005 in a Swift Boat Company, doing the Euphrates River. So he's probably around there at the same time you were. So, I mean, it was a much more kinetic environment, a much more dangerous operation than what we see now. We didn't have a lot of the technology
No.
back then that we do now, with first person view drones or intelligence signet, any of that kind of stuff. It was kind of on the forefront of development in a post, 90s non-deploying army, even post Bosnia. So it must have been really interesting to see the rapid development and TTPs and everything else overseas. And you guys were out there grinding, from day one.
No, absolutely. The one thing that I will say, and we kind of moved down a different path. It's a little bit different in the terms of how the expectations that we levy on our leadership, right? And I'm sure you've heard the term, you're a leader regardless of who you are in your rank, right? You can be a leader to private, you can be a leader all the way to general. And I think the problem with the military nowadays is we've lost that sight on leaders, growing. Leaders, very few leaders are actually just born to be leaders. We groom people, we make leaders, and I think we've gone to the wayside with a lot of our younger generation of service members to actually grow the leadership that we need to be successful in combat operations and in peacetime operations, quite frankly.
No, actually, I completely agree with you. And that's actually a really good talking point is what have you seen in your time in the Marine Corps in the early 2000s in terms of leadership and the characteristics that those officers, men and women, both held, even NCOs, and how that compares to what the modern military is experiencing now? Because that directly ties into the situation we're going to end up talking about is, leadership, transition, and everything else, and how that was an absolute failure, in the later years and in later administrations.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to see, you hear people talk about servant leadership and, things of that nature. One of the greatest things that I had the opportunity to do was to lead men and women in both peacetime and combat operations. That is the pinnacle of my career, regardless what I've done, is being able to have a formative impact on those young service members' lives, to excel them or push them to the next level in their military service career, whether they choose to stay in the military or not. And when I was in the military on a daily basis, from the top down, there was a real emphasis on character. There was a real emphasis on work ethic. There was a real emphasis on individuality. We transitioned 10, 15, 20 years later. I've been retired since 2013. And we see, the emphasis on groups of people, the LGBT community, really shoving that down military service members' throats, sitting in classes for, 10 hours a day, learning about, the ins and outs and the nuances of, diversity, equity, and inclusion, instead of working on crossing danger areas, instead of working on how to do, riverine, helo, or track operations, actually doing combat, learning how to simply read a map. And I think a lot of those skills, I've talked to a few other people. It's interesting enough, and it's jokes say this jokingly, but you have a generation of people who are more concerned about equality, race, gender than they are about serving their actual country and doing the things that they need to do to learn to protect their fellow service members in the fighting hole next to them, or to actually kill the enemy. And that's what we do in the service, is we defend our country and we close with and destroy the enemy by fire, maneuver, or close combat. That's just plain and simple, and that has never changed, and we've moved away from that.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I joined in 2006. It's a completely different military now than it was back then. And like you said, the basics are so important, whether you, like I said, map reading, trying to get younger guys in the military now to understand just like the basics, the simple soldiering, being a Marine, every Marine is a rifleman first. I've seen soldiers and Marines and airmen and sailors, they become so dependent on technology because we enjoyed so-called 20 years of technological superiority. But, I can say firsthand, when I was in CENTCOM, 2 years ago, that when Russia invaded Ukraine, that all went out the window because the enemy has the same exact, if not slightly worse, technology that we do, and you have to go back to the basics and map reading and doing compass work and shooting on iron sights, because you turn on those electronics, they could see you from space, so to speak. Right.
That's
so,
right.
and we've lost those basic soldiering skills, and it's made us a far less deadlier force on the personal level. And it's become so incredibly dangerous. And you experience that firsthand. And I think people like to relive the glory days. They go back and look up all the old YouTube videos on, the initial invasions and go, oh yeah, that's how it's going to be in the next one. And it's not going to be. In a near peer conflict with these types of things, what we're seeing in Ukraine is basically World War I trench warfare with first person view drones, with thermites strapped to them. And it's absolutely terrifying. And, if you don't understand the basics and have good leadership, because you're going to have guys getting killed instantaneously all the time. And you're going to have somebody pick up, the chaff behind you and keep moving those people forward. And if you don't have enough breadth of experience and leadership's transitioned in the ranks, you're going to fail, and that's an incredibly dangerous thing that I don't think people understand now. So tell me about how you met your wife and, how you started your family. You mentioned you got injured in 2006 and everything else. So if you want to talk about that, you can too, but I'm fascinated to learn your transition story out of the Marine Corps as well.
I did. My transition story is pretty interesting. So, and it ties into when I was injured. I was injured in 2006. I was on a military transition team. Specifically, I was in Ramadi and working with the 7th Division MIT. About a week prior, there was a complex ambush on an area called OP 298. And it's right off the area of ASR Gremlins and ASR Michigan, which is in Ramadi, and cuts through in a place called the 5 Kilo District in Tamim.
Quite contentious area back then, Chris.
Very, very, very. And so they had basically set up anti-vehicle trenches along Gremlins because that was the main entrance into OP 298. So they had a mortar complex ambush, mortar and medium machine gun fire, and then they drove an SVBID straight into the gate. And they had a Bradley tank, essentially a Bradley tracked vehicle blocking the gate. They would move it back and forth, rammed it right into that, killed quite a few people, unfortunately, American service members, Iraqi police officers, and transition team members to include Iraqi soldiers. So trying to rebuild that, we were in charge of all those MIT teams in AO Topeka. We went out there with my colonel, met with the lieutenant colonel who was specifically in charge of that MIT team, and we decided to go into a foot patrol in that area in the Tamim 5 Kilo District, which is, if you've ever been out in that particular area, I mean, you're puckered tight when you're going through there. So we got out there. We had a successful foot patrol for a good couple hours to make our presence known, win the hearts and minds of the locals, things of that nature. And we went back into OP 298, and they had just recently redone the Texas barriers to draw traffic off of ASR Michigan through these vehicle checkpoints before they actually entered into the Ramadi proper. And I was sitting over there. We were watching the Iraqi soldiers and the Iraqi police officers do their mission of actually checking. And I happened to see a white suburban style vehicle, which is a Bolo vehicle, roll up into the checkpoint. And this thing was low riding. So I immediately brought out my weapon, went to take 2 to the engine, 2 to the, the brain pan for the driver. And I didn't get that far. The vehicle detonated, launched me into the air, and launched me into, basically hit the ground, hit my neck, my back. Significant damage, ears, nose. I've had a little bit of corrective surgery to make me look better. Thank you, Navy.
You look great, Chris.
My nose is pretty crooked.
Oh, yeah.
But I had some chest issues. My left lower lateral rib, punctured my diaphragm, my left lung, injury to my back, my neck. I have a full L5S1 fusion, et cetera. So I was evac'd out of country and was at Wounded Warrior Battalion East at the time. And I already had orders to go to Marine Barracks 8th and I. So being the military guy, right, we suck it up. I had a full L5S1 fusion. I had a spinal cord stimulator implant. I did physical therapy. I just tried the absolute best to be the good Marine. And so, but sometimes, God and life have different plans for us. And I was a platoon commander for Marine Barracks 8th and I Bravo Company at the time. And my body was literally just falling apart. I remember during I did the Friday night parades, the sunset parades, Arlington National Cemetery, burying our fellow service members and doing those ceremonies. But it was during a particular Friday night parade. that my body was just like, hey, I've kind of had enough. And my knee blew out while I was doing the passing review. Now I made it through that, and I went to the hospital right afterwards, and I just literally, my body fell apart. And so the Marine Corps at 18 years said, hey, we kind of had enough. We're going to separate you from the Marine Corps and medically retire you. And I wasn't having it. I've got a lot of friends that are still in the military, missing eyes, hands, arms, portions of their legs. And, we're actually being productive leaders, right? It doesn't matter if we're missing stuff or we're kind of jacked up. It's about being a leader. It's about being able to contribute value to the service in some capacity, right? And I still felt that I had value.
Yeah, of course.
So I fought the Marine Corps on that, and I won. I went through kind of like this whole board thing, which was a joke. But I submitted an administrative action form after that, and the Marine Corps said, you can have 3 choices. You can either be an adjutant, or an adjutant.
Oh, an adjutant. Got it. Perfect. Yes.
Yeah. So the last,
did you get to work in like the offices in Quantico with like the ceiling fans in the 50s where it's got like one blade left and it just squeaks?
No, no. I was actually down at Del Mar and on Camp Johnson. My first, a senior captain, almost ready to be selected for major. I was actually selected for major by the time I wanted to retire. But my first command, I was a company commander, and I was the adjutant at the same time at 9th Communication Battalion. That's another story, but 2 of the most amazing, they're both generals now, commanders that I ever had in my life, really set me up for success and supported me because I had some difficulties coming back. I was the first officer to go through like the PTSD program. I was really struggling for a long time, but I was the company commander, and I was the adjutant for 9th Communication Battalion, and I was the adjutant and the company commander of 1st Marine Headquarters Group. So that's all the G1 through G10 and all that kind of stuff. You might think being an adjutant is easy, and I did well at it, but I dealt with that 1% of the Marine Corps and the Navy that no one wants to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
I never had a gray hair on my head until I took that job.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I did that for about 4 years. That put me at about 22. And I was kind of done, My commander came to me at the time and said, hey, we're sending you to Afghanistan. Okay. I'm disqualified for, whatever. He's like, well, you're not going to go out of the wire. Don't worry about it. It's not that I did. I mean, I have a Purple Heart, right? I've bled for this country. I've been in combat. I've been in significantly kinetic operations. So it wasn't a matter of not wanting to or whatever, but, I had already gone through that stuff. And so as a good Marine, I saluted and I said, yes, sir, I'll do it, but I submitted a request masked and essentially to bypass my colonel at the time because they wanted to send me. And I was just like, I'm kind of done because they put my retirement on hold.
Yeah.
I had already submitted for retirement at that time.
Sounds like the Marine Corps. That's exactly
what they would do. I had a job lined up with the railroad at the time already. And so it was time to go for me, I mean, when you don't love something anymore and you struggle with it, I love the Marines. I love Marines and I love the Marine Corps, but it was time to go. It really was. I was tired. I was beat up. And that was kind of the last straw. So I kind of exited service, and that's where we were. And I met my wife kind of within that time frame. She met me when I was at my worst.
And she still loves you. So that says a lot about her.
Yeah, amazing woman. She was actually working at the Navy. I was the inpatient out treatment facility, PTSD, all that stuff. And so I had met her there at the time, and, we talked, and we eventually just kind of went our separate ways. And I think she thought I had just gotten out. And I hadn't talked to her, and I'd have to ask her for sure, but I hadn't talked to her in a while. And I came back and I was like, hey, can you give a message to this Annette? And want to kind of talk to her. It was just kind of all downhill from there. She's seen me at my worst, and she's still taking care of me all these years later because I have health issues. I just got out of the hospital, just recently. I just had surgery on my stomach. I mean, amazing, amazing woman. She's gone through me with everything that I had in the military, already being injured. And that's a tough job. She's gone through the January 6th stuff, and her experience is uniquely different from mine. We have some shared experiences of January 6th, but her experience is uniquely different from mine in a lot of ways too. And all the injuries and stuff, I'm still dealing with this today. And man, I tell you what, if God picked somebody for me, he definitely landed the best woman in the world. I'm partial, but
oh no, I agree. I mean, when I heard her speak at Trump Bedminster, I was really inspired, and like I wasn't 100% familiar with your story. Like I've heard, these stories in the background, but that's what I always tell people is don't judge people until you actually talk to them. I get a lot of shit because I fought the federal government for the last 14 freaking years on my different stuff. And then, people always assume like, oh, January 6ers, they're all terrorists. And I'm like, well, why don't you calm down a minute? And they're like, well, how could you say that? I'm like, well, because I got sent there 48 hours after the thing occurred. And when you got on ground and you understood what was actually going on, you sit there and throw your hands in the air and just go, this is all bullshit. And I'm probably one of the first guys to even openly say that. It's just like, we went there fully kitted up, C-130 middle of the night, whole 9 yards. Like we thought we were going to like Civil War, and we get down the ground and it's just some guy in a rainbow, Speedo and Mariah Carey rollerblades flying down the street in an LGBTQ flag while I'm sitting pulling concertina wire across the street going, what the fuck are we doing right now? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it was so utterly confusing. And I actually got assigned to the Capitol Building, which was kind of cool because because I was with 19 Special Forces Group at the time, and I'm just a rigger over there. So we got all the support guys got sent out there, and we're sitting there and we weren't allowed to wear patches or name tags. It was such a joke because everyone thought we were like CIA because no one was allowed to wear name tags or even like U.S. Army tags. So it was a bunch of like,
you're going full blacked out.
Everyone's wearing full multicam uniforms with no identifying marks on it. I'm like, you're making this worse for the conspiracy theorists, but they just didn't want us getting doxxed on the internet. That was the issue, right? So,
facial recognition, they could dox you anyways. I mean, look at the whole who are those asshats? The people that search for the J6 people, the insurgent group or whatever they are.
Yeah, I know.
They're just an arm of the FBI, but they use facial recognition. So
yeah,
want to find out who they are.
Let's talk about leading up to that. So what was the election? Okay, so obviously you and I are on the same political spectrum, but like even going into the 2016 election, like I thought that was one of the most insane times I've ever seen in American political history. I have Hillary Clinton here running against Donald Trump, and like I'm from New Jersey. I was born in New York, right? I grew up with Donald Trump most of my life. Everyone's like, okay, yeah, he's just your typical asshole New Yorker. It's whatever, and at first you're like, this isn't fucking reality. You're watching a reality TV show play out on, on this presidential election in 2016 post-Obama years. And I think you and I probably both agree on this, going through war with the Bush administration and the Obama administration, two completely different spectrums, but just the catastrophic loss, the sequestering we went through in 2011, like you were just kind of like, we need a big reset button. We need to revamp everything that's been going on. So 2016 rolls around. What was that political environment like for you? So you're out of the military, you're living your married civilian life, and let's talk about how those years led up into the 2020 election.
Yeah, absolutely. So I retired at the time. I'm working for the railroad. We got really involved into the political spectrum as far as watching the news, trying to gather as much information as we possibly could. But you could see the smoke on the horizon. You could see the, idea of what we now know as political warfare and lawfare starting to, rear its ugly head. As the 2016 election came up, the Democrats using their militant arm, Antifa, to burn down cities, to stop people from using their First Amendment rights, their freedom of speech, beating up, and even actually murdering people in the streets. So leading up into that was a real frustration to watch through President Trump's time in office, watch all these cities burn, watch people get beat up for wanting to speak their mind about being a conservative, expressing their conservative viewpoints. And quite frankly, it's not a matter of expressing, I joined the military and the service, and that's still deeply embedded into who I am. I said to protect and serve, right? I don't care, defend the Constitution of the United States. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're an independent. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care. But what I do care about is, using violence and using terror, because those are terrorists. Through 2016 all the way into 2020, burning stuff down, damaging, looting, beating people up, and killing people. That is the true definition of terrorism, using violence to coerce people based on your political ideology. It's something that's different than yours. And so, at that point, through 2016 all the way into 2020, very frustrating. And then the election came on, and you were dealing with it just like I was. And at about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, everybody was like, what the hell just happened? What just happened? And so that was the really frustrating part. And that kind of led into the whole January 6th thing at that point. Very frustrated. We had those conversations, with one another, my wife, very good friends about certain things, but I never had any intentions of actually going to Washington, D.C. to see President Trump speak. I did not choose to go to Washington, D.C. until the spur of the moment on January 4th is when I actually decided to go. And I actually drove straight through and got there on January 5th, just about the day prior.
And this is the crazy part, Chris. It's like you look at the 2016 election and you start realizing that this is real, that this civilian businessman might actually upset politics and remove like the Clinton dynasty from existence. And you're like, you got kind of excited about that. I remember I stayed up all night until they counted the electoral votes. And I'm like, holy shit, he did it. I didn't think that was going to be possible, but he did it. And I think that really laid the groundwork for them to really start manipulating the systems within our democracy, within our constitutional republic here, in order to make sure that would never happen to them again. Because I think as Americans, we're kind of naive to the political system. And I didn't even get involved into local politics until this last year. I've mostly worked on the federal side doing military legislation stuff. And, you kind of see, like, it's kind of funny. I always tell this story, like, you can go to Shelley's back room in Washington, D.C., which is where Ulysses S. Grant used to smoke cigars, after some of his campaign battles. It's one of the few places you could still smoke in D.C. And you see, like, Chuck Schumer hanging out with Mitch McConnell, basically. And so it's all political theater. And you're like, okay, but you never see, in my lifetime, I've never seen it become actually politically violent. I've never seen like things get burned down. And then you start watching this progression during this time frame where people are actually instituting political violence. And I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but like when pallets of bricks are showing up in cities and getting pre-placed for these riots, you're like, wait, what is going on? How is this possible? And you as a military guy, and you understand how insurgents work, they do this stuff. They pre-position equipment. They pre-position people. They have guys who go out and do planned protests in an area to draw attention, to draw fire in order to divert from other situations going on within the cities, right? Like you, as a military person, you understand that there's something more nefarious going on. But most Americans who don't serve in the military or haven't served in the GWAT don't understand that that's how these political, groups work. And then you start seeing them like actually changing how our political system worked. And I think people got so upset in the 2016 election going, this guy actually came in from the outside and broke the system, that they were going to try to make sure that didn't happen again. Because like I said, I thought it was near impossible that Joe Biden could even win in 2020. Just from like, from an outside perspective, you're like, this guy with Obama killed more kids with drones than killed more civilians than any other person involved in the global war on terror. And then you knew the Ukrainian Orange Revolution, and this is what kind of leads up to what's going on now. Like we overthrew the Ukrainian government in
the CIA did.
Yeah. But like Joe Biden's kid was involved in that. They installed him into the government way back then. Like we all saw this going on. Like they were trying to,
part of the infrastructure, the government, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But most Americans, like, I hate to say like do your own research, but like most Americans aren't paying attention to anything outside, their city block. right?
Because it doesn't affect them. You know,
Exactly.
it's really easy. And, you know, the best word you can use for them, you know, my fellow Americans and stuff, but it's freedom freeloaders, right? Because you hear
Freedom
that
freeloaders. Yeah, agreed.
freedom freeloaders, the only thing that stops, you know, what's that phrase? Um, when good people do nothing, evil,
Persists.
you know,
Absolutely.
persists. And
Yeah.
so you have somebody that goes down there, and I talk to people sometimes, and you know, have these conversations, and they go, well, it's not affecting me right now. And when I was in Kansas, I had some people that I talked to, and they'll go, well, it doesn't affect me. You know, I'm working. You know, I have my family. I'm doing my thing,
Hmm.
and it's not affecting me right now. But it will. You should be intimately involved, do your research, and have the ability. It's discernment, and I feel like Americans have lost their ability to discern, you know, what's right, what's wrong, because it doesn't affect them.
I agree. And I think another thing Americans don't understand is the reason why we enjoy so much peace and prosperity is from a geographical standpoint. We have two massive oceans protecting each side of our country. And
We
unless
do.
you're coming through Mexico, the Canadian border, which once again, vast wilderness up north in the Montana area, and then vast open desert in the southern area. Like Texas is huge. I don't think people understand how big the United States is, right? So you're correct. For the majority of Americans, it is very difficult for you to comprehend the influx of illegal migrants or any of these crimes coming in and, you know, over the border because we just don't see it. But when I was over doing my master's degree in England in 2015, there was a massive immigrant crisis coming in from Northern Africa into London. And it was actually really funny. I always love telling the story because Americans don't believe me. Is we're sitting there and we were going to go tour Parliament as part of the global energy group I was with because I was over there studying at Oxford doing some things. And I'm sitting there eating a sandwich and I see all of these Muslim migrants start running towards Parliament in like that open field area right by Westminster Abbey. And I'm sitting there going like, what the hell is this? And all the Scotland Yard cops come out the bottom on horses. They come out from Parliament. They march up. They have like this whole armed division down there. And then you see them go around to each of the cameras and they start going past the news and start shutting all the cameras off. And they're like, well, America, we don't have to abide by the rules that you do here when it comes to freedom of speech. They're attacking the Queen, so we're going to take care of this right out. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I watch these dudes just roll through this group of people with billy clubs and start crushing them because they were trying to storm the Parliament area and disrupt the things that the UK government was doing, you know, with the whole Syria and Middle
Mhm.
Eastern stuff. And
Well, that's
over
over
there,
now.
oh yeah, but like nobody talks about that because that was not public
Mhm.
information. But I only saw it because I was there. And the funny thing is that these Muslim immigrants, these illegal immigrants going into Western Europe right now are destroying the culture of Germany and France and England. I mean, they're buying up buildings, they're building mosques. And I'm not necessarily against, you know, legal immigration as long as you are abiding by the culture of the country you're immigrating to and you respect the laws, the values, the constitution
Yes.
of those countries. The problem is a lot of these people, and you know how these people are, you were in Iraq too, is that they don't care. They just want to replace you and continue living their lives that they did in the Middle East. And it's extremely dangerous. But once again, it is so much easier to get to Western Europe, to cross the borders into Germany, into France, you know, in that area of the world, because like I said, it's so much smaller and condensed over there. And Americans, maybe until recently, with the massive illegal migrant crisis we're dealing with now, where you're seeing all these immigrants getting flown into sanctuary cities, now they're starting to see it. Now we're seeing Americans get killed. We're seeing Americans get raped. Even here in Colorado, illegal immigrants from MS-13 are dressing up as Amazon workers, and then they're carrying fake boxes to doors to knock on people's doors, and they're raiding and then beating people up and stealing their stuff in apartments, faking delivering packages, right? So, but once again, that's still not the majority of Americans, right? They just don't see it. They don't understand. So my biggest question to that all is why did the administration allow that to happen? Why are we losing our American values and way of life? And why don't we care about protecting our culture and everything that men like you have fought for hundreds of years since, you know, the Declaration of Independence was signed? It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
Well, because it's a dynamic change. They want to change the dichotomy of what the United States of America actually is and what it stood for. You know, give me your tired, give me your hungry, give me your weak. When people came in, we're all immigrants in some form or fashion to the United States of America. I don't have a problem with immigration as long as it's done correctly. right?
Agreed.
You come
Agreed.
here,
100%.
you come to the United States. United States is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It used to be that family and Judeo-Christian principles was the foundation, the bedrock of the United States of America, and how we actually grew to be who we are, right? People talk about capitalism, but it was founding on Judeo-Christian principles and the family being the bedrock of what this country became in the future. And we've slowly started to erode that through, trying to change, it's that old saying, right? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. But in this case, we've kind of flipped the script. The needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many,
That depletes the entire point of our so-called democracy.
That's
right.
right.
And you're right, Chris. I mean, I hate to say it, but men and women having babies is what's going to further this country.
Right.
It's not a minority that chooses to sterilize themselves. That I'm sorry, in 50 years, you're not going to exist, and you can choose to live your life as the way you want. But the majority of Americans want to have families. They want to have children. They want to raise them, the way that you've raised your family. And the fact that you recognize this and you went down to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And tell me, what was that experience like? So you said you got there on the 5th, and I wasn't there personally until a couple days after you guys were there. But what was that entire experience like being on the ground there during January 6th?
So I have to say this first. I drove down with 3 other people, and they were actually all my co-defendants in my case. So I had a guy named Ryan Ashlock. I had a great guy named Nick Meitler, who's absolutely ghost. Nobody knows who this guy is. He's never been, you can't find him in any pictures, and he's never been indicted. So there's that one. I wrote that. It's kind of like the Whitmer thing, right?
That's really weird.
3 out of the 4 people, including myself, in my vehicles were either ghost or, like Enrique Colon, a liar and a cooperator with the United States government.
So weird how that works.
Against his peers for the sole purpose of saving his ass. And the interesting thing is, and I'll get into this portion here because I think that you'll find this very interesting later, but I drove down there with them.
Right.
And they were all Proud Boys. I'm not a Proud Boy. I don't have anything against, so I don't know anything about the Proud Boys except for these guys. They were all part of the Kansas City Proud Boy group.
Okay.
I never joined, even though the government tried to associate with me and join me into this group. I never was this group. But these aren't bad guys, for the most part. They're everyday blue collar workers, from what I can see, just trying to raise their kids, make money, live life, and they decide to join this men's group. Okay, fair enough. So I go down there, and there's a whole group of these Kansas City Proud Boys, and it's the day before, and I'm there, and man, I can't remember all the people, but the particulars, and they decide to have this meeting. And so there's a confidential human informant. His name is James Aaron Knowles. I think everybody knows about him. He was particularly tied to my case. And they had their little meeting, and they said, hey, you can't be part of this. And they kind of kicked me out, and I went out and talked to my wife for a while, and everything. And they discussed what was going to happen the next day and their concerns. And one of the guys comes out and tells me, he says, hey, I think our biggest concern is, and I think you'll find this interesting here in a second because it's pretty common. When our biggest concern is we believe that Antifa and BLM are going to dress like Trump supporters or government agents, and they're going to dress like Trump supporters. And we need to figure out a way that we're going to mark ourselves so that we are independent of the people that are trying to infiltrate. So common military.
In a way that makes sense. In a way that makes sense. Yep.
I mean, we used to wear them in combat. It's friend or foe marking, so that you don't have friendly fire issues, whether it's your cat's eyes or, other strobes or, anything.
I mean, even Ukraine, they're wearing different colored armbands and stuff because guys will wear the same uniforms. They will infiltrate, right?
And police do that to this day. Friend or foe markings when they're going into, urban environments. It's chaos. It's chaos. You got to do something. So the choice was made to use orange tape. Okay. And so that's where you see all that orange tape. And I find it interesting is my co-defendant, Enrique Colon, is the one guy that says, hey, we want to mark ourselves with tape, and it doesn't matter what color it is as long as it's not yellow. I guess that's their colors, right? And so he's like, we think that we should do orange. So we go out to the hardware store, and I said, hey, I got you covered. I got cash. I'll buy it. So I buy these 2 rolls of orange tape that you see in videos with me wearing this orange tape, right? That he recommended. And it's really interesting that during the whole thing, all of a sudden, all these other groups, Arizona, New Mexico, wherever, all these other Proud Boy groups, do you know what color they're all wearing?
No.
Orange.
That sounds
orange hunting hats, orange hunting masks, orange hunting vests, orange armbands of some type. And I thought about that, for a second. There was a lot going on. I mean, a lot going on.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I thought about that, and I go, there's something not quite right here, So that's where that whole thing with my case and the orange, tape and all that stuff went.
Yeah.
But we get on the ground that day, and I see patriots praying. I see people having camaraderie, meeting new people for the first time, networking. I saw there were Chinese Americans with big banners there because they know what they've come from to live in the United States, and they're out there doing their thing. The gays for Trump were out there. I saw them, like we were talking earlier. That was pretty interesting, to say the least. But there was just a whole group of people in the environment, the atmosphere. It felt jovial. There wasn't any. You didn't feel any. When I was in Iraq, or I've been in other situations, the atmosphere that you feel before you go on a combat operation, the tension, all those things, I didn't feel that. I felt an atmosphere of friendship, happiness. People were out there to support President Trump. That's what I saw.
That's the way most like Trump rallies are, though. I don't think people understand. I've been to plenty of them. Is that I've never seen anything violent happen at any Trump gathering. I've seen just a bunch of normal Christian Americans or people unified behind, the conservative causes, and we can even see in the most recent assassination attempt, everyone just stood there. They didn't run. They didn't stampede. They sat there and supported each other through that entire thing. So I completely understand the crowd dynamics that you're talking about. And I'm sure this is where you're going to tell me that there was different aspects in the crowd that started changing that for you. And you're mentioning that with the colored armbands. And I think that's very, very interesting from a psychological operations perspective.
Yeah, there were. And, we've gone through, my wife is an amazing forensic person, and she has that mind, that capability. She's gone through these videos and identified some stuff to me. And I told her some of the stuff that I saw, but she's found, gentlemen wearing, earpieces. Nobody carries an encrypted Motorola handset. I'm sorry.
No.
You see someone in the crowd like that. We found a lot of people like that. We know that there were informants in the crowds, FBI agents, Department of Homeland Security, and the Metro Police. I saw interesting things too. I saw it was really interesting from a human perspective, right?
Right.
To kind of jump in because I know that's your world.
Yeah.
I noticed that keeping my head on a swivel, almost every corner I saw somebody there with telephoto lenses on cameras. I saw people with videos. And so like on those street corners covering major avenues of approach, those particular people were gaining their fields of fire, so to speak, and really getting that video and collecting that information and making sure that they saw certain people. And I think that's another discussion for you here in a little while. But, the people like me, military service members who have the capability to be a leader or a threat to the Democrats, a threat to what they see as the problem in the United States. I have that ability to be a leader, right? And so who are they going to go after? They're going to go after me. They're going to try and make me a felon, take away my gun rights, try and, tie me up with civil suits for the rest of my life. That's what they're going to do. But you can really see how they were actually getting, tactical, being strategic on the strategic, operational, and the tactical level, people on the streets videotaping all the way through. And I noticed that the bricks that you were talking about, why do you have canisters of LP gas on pallets on the side of the street? I saw those.
That's insane.
Strategically,
especially in DC. Like, you can't do that shit in DC or New York City. You know what I mean? Like, that's considered obviously not only a hazmat incident, but that's an obvious terror threat.
It's just... I mean, there's not even any construction going on, and there's pallets of bricks that are on the corner.
Yeah, convenient.
And I saw pallets of these of LP gas out there, and I'm like, what? And I just noticed that, and I saw people, in individual or small groups, and I'd notice, a gentleman in one set of clothing, and then I'd see him somewhere else, and he's in a different set of clothing. And
they were switching their disguise back and forth.
Yeah, and I just like, wow, this is kind of weird, So it really, didn't seem to get out of hand. So I can't speak to the actual breach of the actual perimeter of the Capitol because I wasn't there.
Sure.
And that's interesting enough is that they tried to pin that on the Proud Boys, but I don't think that that's the case. I truly believe that.
There's videos of them opening the gates and letting them pass the barriers.
Well, I was on the other side going into the scaffolding area, and I was actually on Constitution Boulevard. I'm an old guy, right? I'm walking around all day, my back. I'm over there.
Yeah, you're not exactly like jumping hurdles here, Chris.
Yeah. I'm over there licking my wounds. Yeah, I'm over there licking my wounds and trying to get hydrated because I'm on my feet all day.
Sneakers. Yeah,
I'm already tired, right? And I'm wishing I had my secret sneakers on, at that point. And the actual area they're talking about that leads into the scaffolding at that point, it had been breached. Now my wife, again, I will say she's really good at this, and I'll send this to you at some other point. But there is, I think, compelling evidence that Ray Epps, who I believe is a federal agent or working in the capacity of some kind of federal agent, had a group of people that were at that main area, and all those people that he spoke to breached that gate for the purposes of catching other patriots in the legal system and to fulfill a narrative for the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, and all those things.
And that's the wild part about this, because I've been to DC dozens of times, right? And what I don't understand is no, you don't fuck with the Capitol Police, right? Everyone knows this. They have the barriers set up, they got cops in every corner, and that's their day-to-day operation, is maintaining security everywhere, right? And you have seen so many videos of that day where Capitol Police are sitting there with their hands in their pockets, walking away from things and letting these people pass. Not even in a normal day in DC when 8th graders are doing their yearly trip to Washington, DC. Do you even see that? Right. But magically when there's, thousands of people in this one area and they're all sitting there going I don't know what's going on, man.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you have
get out of here. I don't buy that.
Hire sitting at the gate who probably weighs 250 pounds and is 5'3", or something, and, can't do anything with it. And they put, someone like that there. It's come on. You should have had people in uniform, in gear. Hell, did you know? So I used to work at Marine Barracks 8th and I. Right. Do you realize that Bravo Company is the quick reaction force for the military district of Washington? They were literally right down the street. Yeah. And instead of getting the reserve folks down here or military people down there, they could have had the Marine Barracks 8th and I, Bravo Company, sitting on that doorstep, and it would have never happened.
I completely agree. And even
they go through riot training, they go through everything.
That's literally their job. That's literally their job.
That is their job.
And it's oh yeah, you guys do the Arlington National Cemetery stuff. Yeah, we get that. But your main defense is you're the no shit quick QRF for Washington DC. And it's funny because even videos come out recently with Nancy Pelosi admitting that she called off the National Guard, because the National Guard in Maryland also is a QRF force. They most of them are MPs. It was funny because when I went there, a couple days later, most of the Maryland cops and the Capitol Police cops are guardsmen and reservists, MPs in the Army that are stationed right there. So they're all out there going, yeah, now I'm making half the money because that's my cop car sitting on that street corner, but now I have to stand here next to this Humvee that has no fuel in it. So we know that there are established TTPs for that exact situation, especially in a post 9/11 environment. We know that there are assets, that there are people ready to go, that there's stuff pre-staged for those exact things, and none of that occurred.
None
At all.
And that was by design.
Convenient.
That was by design.
So convenient. So convenient.
That was by design. Yeah, absolutely by design, because I think that whole thing could have been headed off had they used even something as simple as, those military service members. Even the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, if I'm not mistaken, had that capability. Those guys are trained infantry as far as
they are.
And those infantry units are right there. They could have called those guys in at any point, and I don't believe that this would have ever occurred. But here we are, and then the narrative of the insurrection and the Capitol being breached, which is a false narrative. That's kind of where we are. So I didn't personally observe any of that, Adam. I really didn't. Even I literally walked through the gates and walked up towards where that scaffolding, but I was over to the left. So my interaction that I had, and I had that confidential human source with me the entire time. I didn't know he was a CHS at the time. But I walk up to the west end, or by the scaffolding, and I see this gentleman laying on the floor, right? On his back, on the floor, people walking around him, videotaping him, and nobody doing anything to help him, right? So I go over there and, by myself, and there's a couple other people, and I'm like, hey, stop videotaping, what are you doing? Help this, what's going on, right?
Right.
This lady comes down, another guy, and they're like, hey, you okay? And I'm like, where's EMS services? They're over on Constitution Boulevard, right? So I run down to Constitution Boulevard. If you're familiar over there where the actual the terrace, that West Terrace is in Constitution Boulevard, it's a little bit of a clip, right?
Yeah.
So I run down there to Constitution Boulevard. EMS services over there by that one gate, how it kind of wise off Constitution and goes into the side. You've been down there, you know what I'm talking about. And so I go down there and I'm like, hey, there's a gentleman over there. Something's wrong with him. We don't know what. He's on his back. He's in the supine position. Can you help? They're like, no, we're not going over there because of all the rioting and all the stuff's going on. I'm like, are you kidding me?
It's literally your job.
Your job.
Literally your job.
Life. So I run back over to where this guy is. And at this point, there's this lady. She's on top of him. She's giving him chest compressions, right? There's another guy doing rescue breathing. And so we grab this bicycle rack. We throw this guy on him. We later find out the gentleman's name is Benjamin Phillips, and he ultimately passed away. But we throw this guy onto this bike rack, and we carry him down to EMS services, where they take control of him.
I remember seeing that. That was actually on the news.
Yeah.
Of you guys carrying him.
Just being a military service member, having that, people die, they think, oh, that it's something that we're callous and we're, something. As human beings, we are not meant to kill people. As human beings, we are not meant to just watch people die. It's in our nature to help people. And for them to not do their job, I believe that his death is directly related. 15 minutes, 20 minutes by the time EMS services got to him, us giving him chest compressions and rescue breathing or not, his life expectancy went to zero.
Way down. Yep.
Yeah. So I believe that they are at fault for that. And I hope the family does something in regards to that with the emergency medical services in Washington, D.C. Because I think that they're complicit and that was their fault.
Oh, I would completely agree with you.
But by the time I come back, the entire West Terrace was full of people. I did not get to see all the scrapping and supposed scrapping and the launching of the gas canisters and people fighting and stuff like that. I didn't get to see that because I was involved with Benjamin Phillips at the time. But by the time I came back, the whole West Terrace was full of people. They had already gone up the stairs and whatever. So I'm sitting there and I have this, James Knowles, who's the informant, standing next to me. And his statement matches mine almost word for word, right? Mm-hmm. He looks at me and he says, hey, do you want to go in? And I said, I'm really concerned that people are going to break stuff. Because I hear people saying, "Oh, let's do this, let's do that." Are those agitators? I don't know, but I can hear it. Let's do this, let's do that. So we literally just stand in line and we walk up into the Capitol through a set of double doors, right? I get in there and I see people just walking around, being loud, obnoxious, but walking around for the most part. So I walk in there and I see a gentleman smoking a joint, marijuana cigarette. I worked out there for 3 years. I have an immense amount of respect for our institutions and for the Capitol of the United States. And that really made me mad to see a guy sitting in an office smoking a joint. I don't care that he was smoking a joint, but I do care that he was doing the United States Capitol and he felt that that was all right.
Yeah.
So I literally smacked the cigarette out of his mouth and said, "Hey," essentially chastise him, say, "We don't do this,"
Yeah.
And, he went about his way. I made people pick up trash.
Very Marine thing of you to do. Did you make them repaint the parking things out in the front too? They probably needed to be renamed because that's exactly.
Yeah, we should have. Yeah, we should have.
With your roller paints and you're chipping it off by hand with a screwdriver.
Yeah, since according to one of the media guys, I can't remember his name, I was in full dad mode, is what he's quoted as saying on the video with me, because I was making people pick up trash and everything like that. And I was absolutely it was abhorrent to see people throwing trash and bottles and paper and just stuff on in our Capitol that deserves respect. And that's something I just can't abide by. But other than that, at any point, I go up there and I ask the police officers, "Hey, what can I do to help you?" Right? Guy come over there, and I think he was a lieutenant, maybe. There's video of it. And he says, "Yeah, can you make people leave?" And then I was like, "Okay." So we, make people leave. And right at about that point, I think is the time that Ashley Babbitt was shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a couple of us and we're making people leave the Capitol, and, I'm talking to police officers. You can see the video. I'm like, "Hey, I appreciate what you're doing. We're making people leave. How do I get out of here?"
Yeah.
That was my question, is how do I get out of this place now? So police officer tells me, "Hey, just go back the way you came." So I literally go back the way I came, and those double doors, the police had barricaded this thing, and they're literally fighting people trying to get back in after we had cleared people out. And so we had to go through, we're asking, "Hey, how do we get out of here?" He's like, "You got to climb through the window here." And so we climbed through the window. We get back on the West Terrace, and it's a madhouse. There's so many people on that West Terrace that we couldn't move. Like I was worried that, if someone fell, they would probably get crushed, and we couldn't move. Yeah, it was absolutely crazy. So I ended up getting up on this ledge that leads down the stairway, and I'm walking on this ledge, and I literally hop over on this ledge where there's a kind of like a potting thing, and there's a big conduit, like a 6-inch conduit, and I literally shimmy my way down this conduit to get out of there. That's the only way I could get out. It was absolutely nuts. And then after that, we left, and there was nothing else that was said until I was arrested on February 11th.
And let's just talk about that. So obviously, you were there, you were present, you were in full dad mode, no violence. And at the end of the day, you were actually helping clear the Capitol out and just doing the right thing. Cause there were some people who made worse decisions, obviously. And you get out there, you get home, and what happened when you got arrested?
Well, I will tell you this. We know that the FBI had been watching me for at least 2 weeks after that. So, and there's some kind of interesting stories, and I'll kind of peel off on a couple different directions here.
Sure.
So I'm sure you're going to have some input into this. We didn't know that. So we didn't know that there were FBI agents watching us until
after we thought about it.
And we didn't know until after we would actually go through the court case that they had been watching us, when we got a lot of the documentation.
Interesting.
But they had been watching us. it's wintertime. There's snow on the ground. I just had surgery on my wrist, corrective surgery on my wrist from a previous combat injury. And the morning of February 11th, the FBI, along with the Counterterrorism Task Force, local police, and local sheriff, descended upon my house for the sole purpose of making a statement. They had a bearcat in my backyard. They had one in my side yard. They had one in my front yard. Three armored vehicles
Jesus
for me,
Christ.
right? And I'll tell you why here in a second. They enclosed my entire neighborhood down. Nobody could go to work. Absolutely ridiculous. For the sole purpose of making a statement so that anybody else that saw that said, you know what, if you fall out of line, if you do something that we don't like, this is what's going to happen to you.
Absolutely.
And that's why that occurred. They could have came to my house at any time, Adam, and said, hey, Mr. Kuehne, we would like to talk to you about the events of January 6th. Would you be willing to talk to me? And I would have said, yeah, I would let me get an attorney, and I will be more than happy to have a conversation with you. Instead, they rolled to my house, 7-degree weather on February 11th, right? My wife is standing, my pregnant wife is standing out in the cold, carrying my son, while Counterterrorism Task Force, blows through my house, searching for God knows what, and I'm getting jammed into the snow with a busted wrist. I am not a threat whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
And then I get hauled down there, right? But later on, we find out Garrett O'Boyle, who's the whistleblower, the FBI whistleblower, was at my house on February 11th during the raid. And he's been on various talk shows and stuff saying, hey, I'm sorry, this shouldn't happen. But what he was told was that I was making guns in my basement. That's what the FBI told all those people, is that I was making guns in my basement. I'm a Marine sniper. I'm a highly trained service member, yada, yada, yada. You get it where it goes, right? But in reality, I was, a military service member for sure. I was a licensed FFL. I bought and sold firearms legally to the public and other people. And that's what I was doing as a business while I was out of work and going to school full time. I was a licensed FFL. And
what's the problem here? You have a license.
I have a license. If they would have done their due diligence, they could have easily checked that I had an FFL license, because I used the NIC system, which is FBI, right? I used the NIC system.
Go through the background check.
Through ATF, but they didn't do the due diligence. And they just said, hey, this guy's a former sniper and a Marine. He makes guns in his basement, right?
Oh, my God.
So to give him probable cause to do that. They didn't tell the whole story. And because of that, right, here we are in the situation. My wife loses our baby the next day.
That's absolute insanity. I have another question. So, like, I was surveilled by the federal government when I was taking them through 10th District Court. Like, they were just trying to catch me on anything. Like, I had a guy follow me to work for 3 weeks. I live in the country, so when you see a van parked across the street in the middle of nowhere, I'm like, obviously I'm being watched. Like, my cell phone was getting jammed. They hacked into my email. They hacked into my Wi-Fi at my house. I had to get a new phone. Like, they destroyed everything, right? It didn't work out well for them. Was there any indication that you had any electronic surveillance like that on you, but prior to that, or did they just go in for the straight raid? Did you notice any weird things on your phone or anything leading up to those events?
No, I honestly didn't. I don't know if that was the case, but we didn't find out that they were actually surveilling me until after we started to get court documents.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, I guess, I think about it, hindsight's always 2020. There's a car down the street. There's a car in an undeveloped part of the neighborhood that sits there all the time. You think about it now and you go, okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But no, as far as surveilling me electronically or any other way, no, I never had any indication they were actually doing that. And they just went, straight for the violence of action and the raid at my house.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's like absolute insanity to me. You figured that if you're going to bring 3 Bearcats to somebody's house, like, you better have some probable cause or a reason to. And the fact that you had a license, you were, a legal FFL dealer, you've been through the NIC system, like, that's just blatant disregard for your constitutional rights. Like that's just straight out. That's absolute insanity to me.
Yeah. Now, I was actually running a full business. I mean, I had a business doing business as, the whole, I was paying taxes. I mean, the whole 9 yards. So it's,
Oh, God forbid you pay your taxes too. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right.
obviously this guy's a criminal because he legally has licenses to do his job and he pays his taxes. Let's go after him. So what was that entire experience like for your family? I mean, like I said, I talked to your wife when we were in Bedminster, New Jersey at Trump's place, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to hear her tell this story, and that's
Yeah.
what made me want to go up and talk to her and you during that event. So what was it like for your family?
Me and my wife have had some really good conversations, and it's tough. I think about it, and my son, for instance, and he's like, he said it a couple times. He's like, oh, I had a baby brother or baby sister, and I wonder, and because we try not to hold those things from us, and it's
Mhm.
hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to know that I could potentially have my wife and I could potentially have, a 3-year-old child with us blessing us in our house, and that will never come to be. And that's heartbreaking as a father, as a man, to know that when this all happened, I can't protect my wife. I cannot protect my child. I was incapable. I'm a military service member, and no matter how great I think I might be, I could not protect my family, and it's heartbreaking to know that there was nothing I can do about it. And I feel a certain amount of guilt and in this, and anger. My wife, an amazing woman. Love her dearly. Her story is completely different than mine. I didn't have a life growing inside me, obviously, as a man, but
But the government caused your caused your wife to have a miscarriage. I mean, this is
I
you
believe that.
you swore an oath to the Constitution to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to have your own government betray you, that they took your child from you, is probably one of the most egregious things that I've ever heard in my several years of podcasting.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I do feel that, and I don't think that there's anything that's ever going to come to that. I know that there's never going to be an apology. There's never going to be anything that's going to probably happen to that. But it's heartbreaking to know that the federal government, did that, and took my wife and I's chances of being a parent again away from us, and that's where we're at.
So you get through this entire heartbreaking, gut-wrenching situation with your family. What did the government do to you after this, throughout the entire case process?
Yeah. All right, let me just interject something here too,
Sure.
really quick, because on that day of the raid, when you look at stuff, and I'm sure you've seen that video when the counterterrorism task force came in, all
Yep.
those lasers were aimed and pointed at my wife and my son.
Yeah, I posted that video
I
on my
can't
YouTube
even
channel. It's
begin to
nuts.
imagine, what if my wife would have done something? What if my son? What if? We could have, what if this is death? But we've seen this happen time and time again. My wife and my son could have lost their lives.
Yeah.
And it never had to happen.
No.
Never had to happen. So.
No, I completely agree with you, Chris. I mean, just the fact that they treated you that way. I mean, we don't even do that to some of these narco criminals and these MS-13 gangs. I don't see Bearcats rolling up on gang members and illegal immigrants and child trafficking gang members out here. You don't see any of that. You're lucky if you get a 911 call to be taken seriously out here with all these things going on. But to do that to an American citizen who is legally expressing his constitutional rights and doing everything the right way, like you said before, full dad mode, even when you're at the Capitol. And for them to treat you like this in your family is just like a massive miscarriage of justice.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And we need to, when President Trump, and I firmly believe, even though Biden's dropped out and he's endorsed Harris, when President Trump sits in that office again, he needs to go through and he needs to start dismantling the FBI.
And
you
he's
know.
expressed his interest in doing that, and
Yeah,
people are like, oh, he's just going to go after his political actors. It's we need
yeah.
to break the system that has failed this country for over 20 years, right? And it is just absolute insanity to me that Americans, and I hate to use like the term sheep, but Americans are so dumb. They are so complacent and understanding that every time you give the government an inch, they're going to take a mile. And we've
Yeah.
seen this happen ever since the Patriot Act, right? And ever
Mhm.
since the Patriot Act was signed, we've slowly been losing our freedoms and our independence and our constitutional rights. And for most Americans, they're just too disaffected. No, and like I said, and I blame myself for this. I didn't get involved in my local politics until this election. I've worked the military legislative side of things for over a decade, staying in my own niche, area of
You had
expertise.
faith in the government, Adam. I mean,
I
we
know.
have never had a
I
point in
just
our life where we should have not had faith in our government. I served the Marine Corps for 22 years. The military, you served in the military in capacity as a service member. We have never had any idea or thought that, Adam, that we should not have trusted our government.
I know. And it's just it's insane to me because now what I'm seeing is the reason why our government has failed so horribly is because we have such incompetent people in positions of leadership, whether that's director of the FBI, maybe your local police department, members of Congress. And, I talk to a lot of, I call them the GWAT guys, obviously, right? Because this is our
Mhm.
generation, our last
Yeah.
20 years, I hate to, the boomers sent us to war, and we trusted the boomers that they were making the right decisions for the last 30, 40 years of politics to keep us safe and to protect our country. And then we realized that it's mostly just a bunch of geriatrics who are retired, who have nothing else better to do than to use us as pawns on a chessboard to
And have
further
never
their.
held a real job in their entire life except for college.
Exactly. Yeah, they just collect a paycheck, right? But they did it at our expense. I mean, you've buried just as probably many friends as I have, right? And I sit there and just go, well, when is enough is enough? And it's kind of like the way I see it, and this is my own personal fault, is I took a back seat to it, right? You went and joined the railroad, same exact environment as the oil field, right? It's a bunch of men doing men
Mhm.
stuff, dudes being dudes, trying to further America, trying to make us energy independent and our transportation system secure. And you go out in
Yep.
the field and you're making your money, you're doing your stuff, and you're not involved in politics because you're like, once you get out,
No.
I want nothing to fucking do with these people ever again. But then you start seeing that these boomers or these older people are still controlling every decision, whether it's your taxes to your grocery bills to everything else. And this year I said I had enough of it. I said, that's it. I don't care if it takes my free time away anymore. I'm going to start showing up to my local county commissioners meetings. I'm going to start getting involved in local politics. And holy crap, if I kick the hornet's nest, because just showing up and saying, well, why are we doing it this? Whether it's from building roads or bridges, like super simple shit, to why are we taking away why are you trying to enact red flag laws in the most Republican county in the state of Colorado? Right? I mean, the basic stuff. And then you're talking about these people are infringing on your rights because they have nothing else better to do than tell you to shut the fuck up, comply, and do whatever it is. But then we see the results of this. Because who are the people going after you, Chris? It's a bunch of old people who have nothing else better to do, who have been involved in the government for 30, 40, 50 years now, who want to make a statement, who just want to get reelected, who want to do this. And I think that's what President Trump did when he came in. He said, absolutely not. And that guy's been subjected to lawfare for 8 years now. And that's not even including when they went after his businesses in New York for decades prior, right? He's seen the cesspool in the system for his entire time as a businessman, and he's seen it now. And that's why, things definitely changed today, like literally a half an hour before we started talking. But, when I was at the RNC this week, people are always saying, look at all these sheep, look at all these people there. Like the RNC was the most unifying thing I've ever seen the Republican Party do. And I sat there and went, holy shit, we have a chance. Like we
Yeah.
actually get these younger millennials like JD Vance, great VP pick, right? He's on our spectrum in terms of age, right?
Yeah, for
We
sure.
we get these guys in and they've seen the cost of war. They know the cost of loyalty and what happens if you're loyal to the wrong people. And I think people like that, millennials, and then people like yourself speaking out and taking politics seriously now is realize, Chris, we can sit there and petition the government all day to adjudicate our cases justly. Like I could do the same thing. All the administrative boards, every single thing, going through the legal system, going through the court system, and what's happening now. I'm still an E5 when I should be a lieutenant colonel. Sitting here running a podcast, and they're trying to send you to freaking prison.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's where we're at now, is because I take personal responsibility for this. It is my failure that I didn't get involved earlier to stop this train. And now this train has got so much momentum behind it that it's going to take people like you And me and anyone else watching this podcast and all these other younger people who've had their families destroyed, they've had their constitutional rights stripped from them, to actually take action and get involved in the government, and not just to go out and vote. Voting's nice. Voting sounds great, but you got to start speaking up. You have to start being an activist. You have to start getting involved in these local, whether it's local government or federal government, going to these events that you and I met at, right? You have to be involved. You got to spend the money, get the hotels, get the plane tickets, whatever else it is, because investing in your freedom is probably the most legitimate investment and cost expenditure that we can justify as Americans. And if we don't, then I'm going to have to sit here and podcast with another 30 of you, and because we're all going to jail after this. you know what I mean? At the rate we're going, we're all going to jail, right? I mean, it was a joke in the military meme community a couple of weeks ago that even the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force now are out there saying if you put memes out against leadership or public officials that you're going to be charged under the UCMJ. I'm like, well, I'm definitely going to jail then, because that's all that we do, right? So,
well, they'll just turn the local federal penitentiaries into the
gulags.
Patriot headquarters.
Patriot gulags.
Yeah, that's where we'll be there. That's
Chris,
absolutely
how did we get here, though? I mean, like I said, like, it's our failures for not being involved in politics until it's too late. I don't think it's too late. I think right now we're at the precipice of, we have another good solid months of campaigning and trying to support the politicians that abide by those America First principles. We can't keep reelecting the geriatric boomers who've been part of the establishment cabal for decades. And, I hope that by people listening to your story that we can adjudicate your freedom again, and that we can get you vindicated and justly supported, whether through that's the January 6th Foundation that, we saw at the Trump Bedminster event, because you're not the only one, Chris. And you know that. You're just one of the few guys that has the balls to come out and speak up about these things, right? Because people are afraid of retaliation. They're afraid of 3 Bearcats showing up at their house if they start talking about it. But if we don't talk about it and we don't do something about it, nothing's going to change.
It's got to change from the ground level up. We've had our country being chiseled away, the fundamental foundation of our morals and values chiseled away for the last, I want to say for the last 50 years. And it's been slow. And every time they overreach to see how far they can go. And it's as simple as even starting at the school level.
Yes, absolutely.
Don't let the schools and the teachers try to tell you that they need to sexualize your children at an early age. That disgusting. It's disgusting. Don't do that. But it starts from that level, even the lowest level, all the way up to the federal government. We need people that are actually going to go out there and voice their opinions and be moral people going into the government. I've considered it multiple times. I don't know. God is going to put me exactly where I need to be when I need to be there. But we need people to get out there. Yes, we need to get people out there. Voting's great, like you said, but we need to get people involved in politics, to support people at the grassroots level, to run for superintendent of schools, to vote, county sheriffs, police commission, everything. But we need those people to get out there and have their voices heard and make America a principled country again.
And we have the people to do it. We have so many good veterans from the last 20 years of war that are principled people that feel so disaffected that they watch their country get destroyed over the last 20 years and get in trillions of dollars worth of debt and kill millions of innocent civilians overseas. And at the end of the day, some people just want to sit back and say, I don't want any part in this anymore. And I understand that. I felt that way for years. I did. I was like, I don't want anything to do with these people anymore. But then you realize, if not us, then who? And then you watch the best of the worst take power. And the best of the worst is literally why we're having this conversation right now. It's because you don't have moral judges. You don't have moral police officers, because a bunch of losers basically got into positions of power and now they're running free with it because they like the power. They like being called sir and ma'am. They like being called congressman, congresswoman. And like I said, I'm not saying go out and run for Senate or Congress, maybe work a few years in local politics before you do that. But just like you said, go run for your board of education. Go be a mayor in your small hometown. Show up to your county commissioner meetings and start making the difference now. Start getting involved in politics because it's free. These local politician events, you don't get paid. They're all like unpaid positions. So take some time out of your week instead of fucking around on Netflix and sending angry memes on Instagram all the time, like I do. Go out there and get involved in your local stuff. And together, collectively, people like you and I and everyone that listens to these things can actually take over the government and legally overthrow these people, right?
Yes.
you and I have way more friends than most of these people. I mean,
Yeah.
no one likes these people, and they don't like, who likes AOC? Nobody, you know what I
No.
mean? But I bet you and I could walk into the Bronx and probably have a cup of coffee with anybody there because we can connect with any American. We might have our differences, but at the end of the day, you and I are capable of having these conversations. And that's what's important.
Yes.
If people don't hear these conversations, then we can't connect as Americans. And we're not really divided. I think that's just a misnomer that is being put out by the political parties that at will right now. Because like I said, you and I can go out and talk to anybody in any state and probably have a good, honest conversation. And at the end of the day, we realize that we are all Americans and we could do this together. And we have to let these evil people stop having power and the ability to take away your freedoms.
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I believe that this country is not as divided as they pretend it to be. I think that there's a small population that's out there saying, "Oh, you're a genderphobe, you're a a racist," and all those type of deals. But I have personally not seen that. Um, you know, Today's day and age, the only thing that does is serve to divide us or an attempt to divide us. But I
Yep.
have conversations, you have conversations every day. I don't see that. I
I agree
really
with you.
don't see that. I believe that people, regardless of their religion, gender, sexual preference, or political affiliations, are out there having critical, not just critical, but crucial conversations about the fate and the forward momentum of this nation.
No, I agree 100% with you, Chris. Like I said, it's just because we've done the work. We've been on the ground. We've been in the field. Whether you're working the railroad, you're working in the oil field, you're working in the military, you're a police officer, you're a farmer, or you're a businessman walking around the city. You have to interact with normal people all the day. And if Americans acted the way that the media tells us we're acting, and you just go off and just go off on everybody every day, we'd be way more divided. We'd be actually divided, but we're not. It's just like these minorities of people and these different perspectives that throw gasoline on a fire that doesn't exist, and that's why I'm hoping that, with this upcoming election season, that Americans are finally waking up. I hate to use that term, but realizing that people have a lot more power than they think they do. And it's so important to actually go out and get involved in your local government. So that way we don't have three Bearcats showing up to every American citizen's
Right.
house, you know?
I think it's also important, Adam, that we have people like you, because I think the days of legacy media are slowly but surely coming to an end. I really think that you're going to see, streaming and value streaming. I think that you're going to see an end to things like, cable communications, media, legacy news media outlets, because people are actually starting to dive deeper into politics or finding out on other information by using alternate media, like people like you, going out there and having those podcasts. And I think that is going to be the future. And your job, I believe, is going to be critical within the next, the next 4 years, really,
Absolutely.
throughout this next administration and then beyond, as we start to try and get that information.
I really appreciate that, Chris. That means a lot to me. And I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, I can't go into super specifics because obviously it was a classified situation, but I will never forget we were overseas in CENTCOM when the Roe v. Wade decision got leaked, right? And let's just say that the night before, something really bad happened overseas that we fucked up, right? And it was like, oh, this is going to go all over the news the next day because this wasn't supposed to happen. And then I was like, oh, look at that. CNN and MSNBC are magically publishing a leak in Roe v. Wade. And then all the attention went to that. And everyone forgot what was going on internationally for like 3 weeks. And then you sit there and you watch it happen in real time. And you're like, holy shit, we're worse than the Chinese Communist Party. Every
Yeah.
single media source in the United States is controlled. It is unvetted. They have a specific narrative that they have to go through. And it's like I said, we all know this in the background, but like seeing it in real time, to watch how Americans are so easily distracted by things that mean nothing. And we're detracting from the real news of what's really going on in the world. And like you said, unless you spent time in a third world country, I don't think people appreciate how good we have it here in the United States. We are not as oppressed. And it's not like that. I mean, maybe different in your case specifically, but it's not like the Gestapo showing up at my house and arresting my family and throwing me in jail and into a labor work camp in North Korea. I have clean running water. I can plug in my cell phone charger and I have electricity, not only 1 hour a day in Syria.
Yeah.
I think Americans just need that perspective. And I hope that they really embrace your perspective on these things, that our freedoms are at risk. Our rights are at risk. And if we don't work together as a community, and treat each other like family, this is just going to keep going downhill, and we can't let that happen.
No, the next step, if we don't, and the values and the structure of our communities, of our local and state and federal government continues to erode, it's going to be easy for an authoritarian to step into that role and take over and say, hey, bygone, and there's America, goes to the wayside.
I mean, that's what I think we've seen with the Biden administration for the last 4 years. I mean, that's a perfect example of an authoritarian coming in who's not even running the government. And with COVID and everything else that happened, I mean, I don't think Americans realize how much they gave up for this guy. No. They don't. You know what I mean? Like, they just, okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll wear a mask on a plane. I mean, I still see people wearing masks today. I'm like, these people are deranged. Like, they're out of their minds. Like, you literally have mental issues. I mean, people even trying to say that the assassination attempt was Trump planning it out to get more media. And I'm like, he's the most famous man in the world. He doesn't need any more notoriety. It's just absolute insanity to me. Absolute insanity.
Absolutely.
So where are you at now, Chris? Like, I know you're getting down to the wire with everything that's going on in your personal life, but like, what is your family and you personally experiencing now, getting ready to deal with what happened with you in court? And you could talk about what happened to you in court. What was the resolution of all those things, and where are you at now?
Well, for all your viewers out there, I have to caveat by saying that the federal justice system is not the federal justice system the way it was designed, and not the way it's meant to be. Throughout these last 3.5 years, I have essentially been going through the process, and it came down to the point where I only had one door to open. And that one door was to plead guilty to a felony, which was civil disorder, the lowest felony you can get, which was actually enacted in the 60s to actually jail African-American who they considered civil dissidents. It was passed with the Housing Act. So that's the one they used for me. It hasn't been used in 40 years, 50 years. So
are you identifying as an African-American now, Chris? Is that what we were saying?
Oh, well, yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So that's what they used against me. And it was either that or go through the trial system and have a DC jury convict me of everything plus some and put me in jail for 8, 10, however long they were going to put me in jail. So I really had no choice. A lot of people say, oh, I'm going to fight, and that's their prerogative. But, I have my wife to take care of. I have my son to take care of. I am the provider. I am the Christian head of this household. And I had a lot of things to do with my family. And I wasn't willing to, go to jail for 15, 18, however many years. I needed to be here to take care of my family. And that's just the reality. So I was sentenced to 75 days of incarceration in a federal penitentiary and 2 months of house arrest and 2 years of probation. And it's interesting because I've heard comments saying, oh, he only got 75 days of jail.
Yeah, okay.
We've inoculated ourselves to say it's only 75 days. It's okay.
And it's also not you. It's also not you. You're not the one getting locked up for 75 days.
That's right. But we shouldn't be in this position where these people are getting 75 days, 8 years, 10 years. We should not even be in this, where
that one guy got like 20 years.
75 days. I shouldn't be in this position to begin with.
Exactly.
A lot of these people that they're going through January 6th, there's some people that did some bad stuff. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
Breaking stuff, assaulting police officers, whatever the case may be, they'll be held accountable for that in some capacity. But there's a lot of people that should have just got the trespass charge, got their hands slapped, paid a fine, and been on their way. Not doing 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever the case may be.
You were picking up trash.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of people that are in the same situation, but they don't look at that. They look at, this is persecution of a small population of people. I mean, how many have they arrested so far? Like 3,500?
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. So, but really, it's a small group of people that they're politically persecuting. Mm-hmm. Can you think of any other time in history that that's happened? I'm just saying. Yeah. You can.
Yeah.
And people got outraged by it, right? And there is a population of people that are outraged by this, but I think President Trump's going to come in. He's going to take care of this stuff because it's been hard. It's not just the political persecution for our government. A lot of these January 6th defendants, including myself, I took a job with a company called Abbott out here in Arizona. I was completely transparent with them, and I told them, hey, look, I'm going through these issues. This is what's going on. They moved me from Kansas to Arizona and said, hey, it's not a matter of what's going on. It's the value that you provide to the position that we're hiring you for. All right, good to go. I figured I was going to be working for a good company. I went in September or February. I went to the courts. I pled guilty to I think it was in September. I pled guilty to the civil disorder charge. Not more than a month later, they fire me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm driving home from work. I get a call, said, hey, you're terminated. Your employment's terminated. And they're telling me it's because I violated some policy about being a felon or something. I was like, that's interesting. I had a guy that was working for me on my team that spent 13 years in prison for manslaughter. And
I would say that's a little bit worse than the guy picking up trash at that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But my point is that it's political persecution. It's not just at the federal government level. It's at people are feeling these corporate, entities that are also an arm of our federal government. Yeah. Getting fired, not being able to get jobs. You have J6ers out there that are perfectly employable, that have great skills, can add and contribute to this country, pay taxes, the whole 9 yards, and they can't.
But they list you having a felony on your record. Yep.
And the corporate are punishing them. When does the punishment stop, Adam?
It doesn't until somebody steps in. Like I said, if anyone knows about anything about false indictments, it's Trump, right? And I think he sees that now. He's experienced it, and I'm hoping that he comes in and does the right thing and gives pardons to all this stuff, because it's absolutely insane. How are you supposed to provide for your family? How are you supposed to be the head of your household? How are you supposed to do all these things as a good Christian man? Like you can't do this with false persecution. But it's like Christ tells us, if they persecuted me, and they're going to persecute you.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And nonstop, Adam. I tell you, it's a great intro. But God has provided for me at every single time. Mm-hmm. Amazing American patriots. I'm going through this legal process. It costs an immense amount of money.
Yes, it does.
And amazing patriots have, gone to my website or Patriot Freedom Project, and they have donated money to my legal processes. 100% of the money I've gotten has gone to my legal defense. And I'm not done. I'm still getting civilly prosecuted, just like Trump. I'm getting civilly prosecuted for something I didn't do. Yep. Their thing in the civil cases, they're saying that I breached these things, and I never did, but they're going to drag me through. And here we go, just like Trump, he's got the money, I don't, and they continue to just tax me, right? Tax me. And then I'm still going through, and I have another attorney, because I am not willing to sit back on my heels while Abbott fired me for political reasons. So I'm going after them civilly, because if I can get some sort of judgment against Abbott, maybe then there'll be some kind of precedent that other judges can look at for other J6ers being fired, or even non-J6ers being fired for political reasons. I'm not going to tolerate that.
I mean, I agree with you, Chris. I have spent $250,000 on my own legal cases with the U.S. government over 14 years, and my case is still not resolved.
Yeah.
So I completely get it, man. I understand where you're coming from, and like I said, it's nice that Trump has millions of dollars, and he has the notoriety to fundraise to do those things. But people like you, they don't have those resources, and that's why that nonprofit foundation that you guys are a part of, that we learned about at Trump Project. Yeah, the Patriot Freedom Project. If for all the listeners out there, please go to the Patriot Freedom Project and please support those causes. And Chris, please send me a link after we finish the show so I can post that in the show notes, for people to go to, because we can't win this war unless we do it together. We can't do this individually anymore. Like I realized I couldn't resolve my case individually. I fought it for 14 years. And then I realized I'm going to have to start podcasting and start talking to people. And then I find out it's not just me. I find out there's all these other people dealing with military retaliation. Right. And just like you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees collectively, with all the millions of dollars if you add everybody else up together. And what's $1 million is worth nothing when it comes to years of your life being in prison.
No, you can't put a price tag on that.
You can't put a price tag on your freedom. And like I said, it's disgusting what they did to you. And I'm so sorry for you and your family and the loss of your child, what you had to endure with those things. And I'm so glad that I can support you. And like I said, if there's anything else I could do for you, especially leading up to your time, if they do actually, pull the trigger on this for you to go serve out your 75 days, please let me know anything that we could do from the outside to help you. We're willing, me and my team and I and everyone else that's listening to this is willing to help you as much as we can.
I really appreciate that, Adam. And I appreciate you having me on your podcast today. And I appreciate all your listeners out there that are, giving value to what I have to say and attention to all the other issues going on in America. And I just want to end off, not be cliche, but, fight.
Yeah.
Fight for our freedoms, fight for what's important to you, fight for this country. It is worth it. Everybody, it is worth it. Fight.
It's all worth it. So like I said, everyone out there, please go visit the Patriot Freedom Project, visit their website. I'll get a link in the show notes for you guys. And please help support Chris and all the people that have experienced the extreme injustices under the Biden administration. And let's get these guys adjudicated. Let's give them back their freedom and let's make our country great again. That's the only way we can do it, is together.
Semper Fi, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Semper Fi. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Chris.
Thank you, Adam.